April 12, 2023, 70 miles north of Cuba. The USS Nitsa, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, tracks an unknown contact on radar. It's moving fast. Too fast to be commercial. The identification comes through. Russian Admiral Gorshkov-class frigate, armed with hypersonic missiles. Range, 12 nautical miles and closing. The captain faces a decision that hasn't been this critical since 1962. In the gray zone between peace and war, where a single miscalculation can ignite a conflict neither side wants. How close is too close? Welcome to the gray zone. To understand how close we came to conflict, you need to understand what the Caribbean represents in 21st century geopolitics. On a map, it looks like paradise, crystal waters, island nations, cruise ship destinations. But to naval strategists at the Pentagon, the Caribbean is something else entirely. America's soft underbelly. The Caribbean basin contains 17% of the world's refining capacity. The Panama Canal, the critical link between Atlantic and Pacific, sits at its southern edge. Major oil transit routes from Venezuela and Mexico flow through these waters. And just 90 miles from Key West lies Cuba, still governed by a communist regime and still aligned with America's adversaries. For 70 years, U.S. naval dominance in the Caribbean was absolute. The Fourth Fleet, re-established in 2008, maintained continuous presence operations. Drug interdiction missions by Coast Guard cutters and Navy frigates became routine. America owned these waters. But in 2018, everything changed. Russia announced it would resume Cold War-era naval patrols in the Caribbean. Not symbolic port visits, actual combat patrols with nuclear-capable vessels. China began investing billions in port infrastructure across the region, from Jamaica to Trinidad. Venezuela, armed with Russian and Chinese weapons, grew increasingly aggressive toward its neighbors. And then came the incidents, the ones that never quite made CNN, the ones where U.S. warships and foreign vessels played a game of chicken in international waters, testing resolve, probing responses, operating in the gray zone where international law gets murky. In open water, war isn't declared with words. It begins with maneuvers. Navies operate under strict rules of engagement, a playbook that dictates every reaction. But gray zone encounters don't fit neatly into the rulebook. They're designed to provoke, not attack. A collision could trigger diplomatic chaos before a single shot is fired. So the order is clear. Hold course, hold fire, hold nerve. Only if directly threatened may the captain authorize defensive action. That decision, seconds long, can determine whether two nations go to war. Every movement on deck is recorded, analyzed, stored. Evidence for history. And behind every command lies the invisible weight of politics. A single flare fired in warning could be portrayed as aggression. Even radar lock-ons, unseen by the public, carry diplomatic shockwaves. The gray zone thrives in ambiguity, where action and restraint look identical. Each side signals strength, without crossing the line. Commanders call it presence with purpose, diplomacy carried on steel hulls. But to the men standing watch, it feels less like diplomacy and more like a coin flip with fate. They know one misread signal, one nervous hand, could ignite the hemisphere. And that's the reality of modern deterrence. Peace balanced on the edge of a radar line. At 5:17 local time, the USS Gravely was conducting routine freedom of navigation patrols off Venezuela's northern coast. 22 nautical miles offshore, technically international waters. Then, radar picked up fast-moving contacts, heading straight for the destroyer. Venezuelan Navy patrol boats, Bolivarian markings clear on radar signature. They closed in at 40 knots, a deliberate approach pattern. Gravely's bridge crew called it in, but Washington stayed silent. On deck, sailors watched the incoming wakes, 30 seconds to visual range. Venezuelan boats began broadcasting warnings in Spanish, accusing the U.S. ship of violating their territorial waters. The destroyer maintained course, calm, professional, deliberate. Then one Venezuelan boat crossed Gravely's bow, inside 300 yards. A collision alarm sounded. Condition 3, man all stations. A Seahawk helicopter launched from the aft pad, eyes in the sky. From above, the Seahawk confirmed. Armed crews, loaded tubes, locked targeting sensors, yet the order from command remained the same. Hold fire. For 20 tense minutes, both sides shadowed each other. One mistake away from an international incident. And then, as suddenly as they appeared, the Venezuelan boats turned back toward their coast. The sea went quiet again, but the message had been delivered. The incident ended without a shot fired. But in Washington, silence did not mean peace. Within hours, encrypted footage from Gravely's CIC was transmitted to the Pentagon and the White House Situation Room. In Caracas, state media told a different story, one of victory and defiance. Officially, Washington dismissed it as routine harassment. Unofficially, it was a test, a probe to see how far they could push without triggering fire. To U.S. naval strategists, it was clear. Deterrence was eroding in the hemisphere. New alliances, Russian, Chinese, Iranian, were creeping closer to America's doorstep. The Caribbean, once an American lake, had become a contested sea. Every encounter, every maneuver, now carries political weight, a message wrapped in steel. The message was simple. We're here too. For sailors aboard the Gravely, that day faded into the logbook like any other patrol. But history remembers these moments. Quiet, unseen, but loaded with consequence. Because every standoff writes the next chapter of deterrence. And in the gray zone between peace and war, the sea never truly sleeps. It only waits. Until next time. In Washington, analysts realized the Caribbean was no longer a backwater. It was a new front. Inside the Pentagon, satellite feeds showed Russian and Chinese naval patterns converging near Cuba. To strategists, it looked alarmingly familiar, a slow replay of Cold War chess. Moscow's Admiral Gorshkov sailed again, this time with escorts from Cuba and Venezuela. In Beijing, officials called it a natural extension of multipolar security. But in private, Chinese naval planners studied the Caribbean closely, like a rehearsal for the Pacific. In response, the U.S. Navy expanded its presence. Destroyers, submarines, surveillance aircraft. These weren't combat missions. They were messages. Each patrol said the same thing. We're still here. We're still watching. Meanwhile, Russia strengthened ties with Venezuela, offering joint naval exercises off La Guaira. The exercises weren't large, but the message to Washington was unmistakable. China, too, hinted at a technical facility in the Bahamas. Officially civilian, quietly strategic. Washington's intelligence briefings grew darker. The gray zone was expanding faster than diplomacy could react. For policymakers, the question was no longer if conflict might start, but where. And as one strategist put it, the Caribbean was just the rehearsal. In late July, a new ship entered the Caribbean, the Chinese Type 054A frigate Weifang. Officially, it was a goodwill visit. Unofficially, it carried advanced electronic warfare gear. Satellite imagery caught the Weifang trailing an American destroyer just beyond visual range. Below them, the USS Florida, a U.S. Navy guided missile submarine, listened in silence. The Weifang's sensors swept for signals. The Florida's hull stayed cold and invisible. On the surface, the USS Gravely mirrored every move, matching heading, speed, and radar posture. It was like two boxers circling, neither throwing a punch, both measuring the other's reach. Then came the signal. A narrowband burst from the Weifang's comm array, aimed directly at Gravely's radar. Electronic warfare, not bullets, but code and static. Gravely's countermeasures kicked in, restoring radar lock and broadcasting a calm reply. From the air, a U.S. Navy Seahawk helicopter recorded everything, every move, every transmission. Back at Fleet Command, analysts realized this was no test, it was a rehearsal. Beijing called the incident normal maritime interaction. Few believed that, because behind the words, both navies had quietly moved from observation to engagement posture. And as night fell over the Caribbean, two superpowers drifted within visual range. No gunfire, no retreat. Only silence, and the hum of engines waiting for dawn. Midnight over the Caribbean. Wind calm, sea flat, and yet no one aboard either ship could sleep. Every few minutes, radar operators checked their screens, searching for movement, praying for none. Across the water, the V-Fang's bridge was lit the same way. Red lights, low voices, tired eyes. Through infrared lenses, both sides watched the other, motionless, waiting. From Gravely's flight deck, the world looked unreal. Stars above, the enemy below the same sky. Below deck, sailors whispered theories. How close the Y-Fang really was. What could go wrong first? On the Chinese side, young crew members checked weapons they'd never fired outside drills. The distance between the ships, barely 6 miles. Every radar sweep felt like a heartbeat. In the CIC, the air smelled of metal and coffee, tension without motion. Then, a faint contact appeared, low and slow, heading straight between both ships. Neither side moved. Both tracked the newcomer in silence. Through binoculars, U.S. watchmen saw Venezuelan sailors staring right back. No words, no radio calls, just engines rumbling in humid air. At 2:43 hours, the Venezuelan vessel turned away, slowly, deliberately. And just like that, the moment passed. No missiles, no shots, only the sound of peace, holding its breath. By dawn, the sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened. Both captains logged the encounter in precise, quiet language. No damage, no incident, no casualties, just two superpowers keeping score. In Washington, the morning brief called it routine interaction. In Beijing, the statement was identical, professional, safe, and in accordance with law. But for sailors who lived it, the words felt paper-thin. Back on land, news headlines called it the Caribbean Standoff. Social media exploded. Hashtags, satellite images, speculation. In Florida and Texas, naval families watched quietly, proud but uneasy. Thousands of miles away, Venezuelan fishermen filmed the ships. Proof they were part of history now. To experts, it was more than a standoff. It was a signal. The gray zone had expanded, and everyone knew it. In the next months, more ships would come. More eyes, more risks. Every patrol now carried the weight of what almost happened that night. And so the Caribbean returned to silence. But the silence was watching. War never came that night. But it didn't have to. Because in this age, power speaks without firing. Presence is the message. Every radar sweep, every intercept, every word on a radio, a silent conversation between nations. A single maneuver can ripple through capitals, boardrooms, and newsrooms alike. The Caribbean, once a calm trade route, is now a chessboard. Every ship, a move. And yet, the ocean remains indifferent, eternal, patient, watching. For those who patrol its surface, peace is measured 1 mile at a time. This is the new front line. Quiet, constant, and closer than we think.